We are just wrapping up with the morning of day 9 of the State versus Hannah Gutierrez. She is the armorer on the set of Rust, where Alec Baldwin fatally shot and killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins. We are at the beginning of the defense's case. Yesterday, the prosecution rested. So far, the defense has called 2 folks from New Mexico OSHA and their defense investigator slash expert. The OSHA folks both said, look, we find Rust Movie Productions wasn't allowing for a safe work environment. They weren't heeding warnings about safety. They weren't holding safety meetings. And ultimately, the employer is responsible for not giving Hannah Gutierrez, the employee, the time she was requesting to do her job. So the OSHA report finding was, hey, the employer was fined because the employer wasn't giving her enough time to do her job, among other large and glaring issues. As I've said previously, that OSHA report was scathing. They fined Rust Movie Productions over $100,000. They were trying to fine them the statutory max, and then the parties settled at that $100,000 fine. But as the prosecution pointed out on cross-examination, the role of OSHA is to determine if employers are maintaining an unsafe work environment. It's not to find criminal liability. It's not to find civil liability. It is specifically an administrative function to sort out whether or not the workplace was unsafe and if the employer is at fault for that. And they determined here the employer was at fault for that. Will that help poke holes in whether or not Hannah was doing her job responsibly because of how badly production was responding to safety concerns? Maybe. It might raise some questions for some jurors. And then we got into the defense investigator, who is a former homicide detective, former military, and he's talking about the quality of the investigation from an expert standpoint, saying the investigator should have done this, they should have done that. I agree with a lot of what he had to say, including, people shouldn't have been on their phones. Yeah, Baldwin shouldn't have been on his phone right after this happened. He should have been kept separate from other witnesses. So should Dave Halls. But he also was trying to poke holes in things that really aren't at issue in this case. No one is questioning whether the gun recovered from law enforcement was the gun that was in Baldwin's hand. There's been no issues about that. So to try to raise that issue this late in trial when the defense hasn't vigorously cross-examined about that isn't really going to get very far. And then on the beginning of cross-examination, this witness was asked, is there any controversy over whether or not the gun that shot Helena Hutchins was the gun that Baldwin had, was the gun law enforcement recovered? He's like, well, no. The judge, as she was dismissing the jury for the day, indicated that tomorrow, day 10, Wednesday, March 6th, will be closing arguments in the morning. It looks like the defense just has one more witness, which means the defendant is not likely to testify. Those things can change contemporaneously, but it seems that at this moment, the defense is not planning on calling the defendant. I think that's a good idea. This afternoon, we resumed with the cross-examination of one of the defense experts, Scott Elliott, the defense expert in police procedure and investigation. The prosecutor lit into him on cross-examination in what I thought was one of the better cross-examinations in this trial. It was well organized, and she scored a lot of points. The prosecutor basically shut the door on Seth Kinney being the problem using the defense expert. The defense expert ended up backed into a corner where he had to agree that, yeah, at some point the investigation into one person does have to stop when no more evidence is turned up. And that's what happened with Seth Kinney. So the cross really undermined much of what that expert had said about whether this investigation wasn't ideal. What I came away with from that witness is it would have been great if law enforcement could have done things better. It would have been great if they had had more people. It would have been great in hindsight if they had changed some things. But at the end of the day, it didn't really impact the investigation because we know who loaded the gun. We know where the rounds came from that were loaded into the gun, and we know who pulled the trigger. And those things do not change. Then we got to the defense's next expert, who is a banker by trade, but a war reenactor and NRA weapons instructor by hobby, who is familiar with both replica and regular firearms, who was qualified as an expert in court for the first time, who then brought demonstrative weapons into court and did not render them safe in front of the jury. And then as he went to render it safe, pointed it towards where the bench was, to which the deputy standing next to him reached over and pointed the muzzle of the gun down. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Oh my God, oh my God. Watch what he does with this weapon. Watch him move it and watch what the pointed it directly at the judge. It was the most wild beginning of an examination that I have seen. The expert, in my opinion, kind of undercut his expertise in weapons handling by getting yelled at by the judge for his pulling a weapon out of the bag and holding it up in court like this without rendering it safe in front of anyone.
Next revolver.
So, Your Honor,
Jesus Christ.
I'm going to object.
All right, first of all, everybody's nervous because you have not demonstrated to us that they are unloaded. So before you start showing us the weapons, make sure they're unloaded, including that one that you just touched.
So the judge kind of lost her mind on him, then the prosecutor lost her mind on him during cross-examination, and the entire point of his testimony was, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm still buffering. I don't know what the point of his testimony was. I think it was to talk about hand loading rounds and that you whack an inertia puller on the table to start to hand load rounds. I think maybe that was the point. I don't know why he even brought demonstrative weapons into court, because he only used them to show the half cock and quarter cock position and like easing the hammer back down, but they didn't wrap any of that up with testimony. It seemed like a pointless witness that after his demonstration of weapons handling in court, everyone was so stressed and distracted that even if he had had a point, it would have been lost. I think it was a complete waste of a witness for the defense entirely. And that was the end of the day. For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.